Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name's Henry Bingaman. Today, I have a guest on that I've wanted for actually a long time since I first heard him on the Tom Woods Show and Liberty Lockdown with Clint Russell. And I just thought he was a fiery guy that had a lot of good ideas. Michael Rectenwald. He's the former Marxist professor at NYU. This is how I first heard his story. He had a Twitter account that was secretly making fun of some of the social justice stuff going on campus. He got doxxed or exposed for that account, and then the administration in the school just came down so hard that he saw kind of the authoritarianism inherent, went a deep dive in libertarian politics and converted from Marxist to hardcore libertarian, which is something you don't see a lot. He's the author of a number of books, including Springtime for Snowflakes, The Google Archipelago, and Thought Criminal. And he is currently running for the nomination for the Libertarian presidential candidate. He's been endorsed by some huge names like Judge Napolitano, Dave Smith, Gene Epstein, a bunch of other people, Jeff Deist. I think Walter Block just endorsed him. So he's got a lot of big names on his side. He also has one of the best campaign slogans I've ever heard, Wreck the Regime. It's got alliterations tied to his name, and it's the perfect message. So did I miss anything big there?
Nothing you missed there, and I'm glad you got into the story about NYU because I don't want to really talk about it that much more. But you hit it on the head. That's the story in a nutshell, and that's who I am very clearly. Thank you so much.
So Wreck the Regime, I've said this on Twitter that it's the best campaign slogan, but I guess it's not going to be perfectly clear to everybody what exactly the regime is. Can you kind of like define what you mean by the regime?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, the regime includes the state, right? That is the government itself, but it also includes all the state agents that are really enlisted and enrolled by the state that become beneficiaries or enablers of the state. And that includes almost, an innumerable amount of institutions and organizations, like, of course, most educational institutions, which serve as ideological state apparatuses, big tech, at least Google, Facebook, and a slew of others who propagate official narratives. And of course, they censor and blacklist information and dissent, and they increase the scope and penetration of state power. Most of the major so-called mainstream media, who, is interesting, basically volley back and forth between each other as to who the primary spokesperson is during a particular time. For example, under war conditions, it's Fox News. And then under things like COVID, it was, of course, the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, etc. And then, of course, it also includes the military-industrial complex and all of its contractors. These are obviously state apparatuses, or as I've called them many times, governmentalities. They do the state's bidding, and they're at least one time or another, if not all the time. And so to wreck the regime is to oppose this whole configuration of state functionaries, whether they're part of the state per se, or whether they're simply appendages of the state.
So I want to ask, you mentioned Google there as part of it.
Yes.
And so one of the books that I've read of yours, unfortunately, the only book I've read of yours was the Google Archipelago,
Okay.
which was really fascinating insights. And, as you probably know, Sergey Brin and Larry Page were initially funded by the NSA and CIA, the massive data surveillance system or whatever it was called. And Google really does manipulate behavior in some really weird ways. You kind of describe it as the panopticon effect, where you act differently when you know you're being watched all the time. But there's the other, like the cultural Marxism, or the Google Marxism, I think you called it in there.
Yeah.
So how do you think Google and the state kind of work together to manipulate us? Because that's one of the most, it's all encompassing in our lives, right? We carry our phones everywhere. We use the internet how many times a day? I'm on it almost all day. I'm sure you are, as well as your campaigning. So
sure.
How do these two institutions work together, and how do we break that?
That's a great question. So I think one of the ways they do it, of course, is by curating reality for us. Google curates reality so that we, certain things that we want to find out about, we can't learn about them through Google searches. They are blacklisting and downgrading and disappearing all kinds of media and information sources and opinions. This is all well demonstrated. They tilt strongly to the left, and particularly to the authoritarian left, as if there's any other. And they are also keeping track of all of your searches, so they have a kind of total database on the user, and they're performing potentially surveillance functions. So these are some of the things they're doing, and they propagate state narratives. They propagate official positions of the state on mostly everything, if not everything. I mean, really everything. So, and they also disseminate a lot of lunacy, a lot of things that are just insane. For example, if you were to type in on a Google search and let the autocomplete list come down, men can, one of the things that'll come up there is men can have babies. And then if you put women can, it'll say women can fly, all kinds of things. So they're trying to autocomplete your mental life, really, not just on things like that, but in general. And they're fabricating a particular construction of reality for the reader or the investigator or just the casual searching person.
So let's say they're not just a branch of the CIA right now, which I'm not
Right,
completely
yeah.
convinced of. What would be the purpose of them doing this? Like, what do they stand to gain from it? And how do we sever that connection?
Well, they have state contracts. First of all, you were right. They were funded initially, their startup funding came from the CIA through In-Q-Tel, the CIA's funding agency, which is state money, but they put like a private gloss on it. And that's where their startup money came from. Same is true for Facebook, although there were a couple intermediaries between In-Q-Tel and Facebook, but still the same flow can be tracked. And I've done that, and others have too. It can be stopped, first of all, by breaking up the collusion between the state and these organs. And that is by getting rid of the state contracts. And, I would say really we need to have a broad awareness of what's going on and get rid of the way that these companies have been able to monopolize reality, have been able to monopolize information. And I'm not saying antitrust law are going after them that way. Competition is always best. But even so, they have the infosphere so curated at this point that even other search engines can't find things, because a lot of them are dependent upon Google's searches in the first place, or Google's organization of material. So this is really a difficult problem, but we have to break this. I think the first step is to break the collusion that comes about through state funding.
Yeah, I had a previous podcast guest on that. He's a privacy expert, and the steps you have to go through to actually get out of their kind of panopticon are incredible. But there is, he said something that really stood out to me, that there's no freedom without privacy. As long as these people are watching everything we do, there's really you are less free than you could be, which kind of brings us to the CBDC, which is another one of the things you've been talking on, because it's the ultimate removal of privacy. Can you kind of talk about because there's one of the great hopes that I see for the future of freedom is like Bitcoin and alternative currencies and digital currency specifically, but then the central bank digital currency is one of the scariest things I've ever seen. So can you kind of talk about how you view CBDCs versus Bitcoin?
Yeah, so to speak to the general point, it's not technology per se that is our enemy. So this is not a Luddite position. It all depends on who's wielding the technology and to what end. And so in the case of CBDC, what we're looking at is, of course, complete transparency of transactions to the Federal Reserve, having an account effectively held by the Fed, although there may be bank intermediaries, and certainly it probably will be. They're not going to disintermediate all banks, although the Bank of International Settlements stated pretty clearly in one of its reports, disintermediate is the word I was looking for, that CBDCs could put some private banks out of business. And the question is, they called it disintermediate the banks, just a euphemism for retiring them.
Just so you don't know what's actually going on. It confuses the issue.
So we're on, if you have a CBDC account with the Fed, effectively, they have they can completely see all of your transactions. And of course, this could lead to precluding certain types of transactions and certain buyers and sellers. Particularly, they could shut down particular sellers of goods, saying that you can't use the CBDC there. And likewise, it pushes them into what would be a black market unless we have the legal tender laws abrogated before then. This means complete surveillance over spending, probably savings, and possibly even debt. And likewise, a centralized control and command center for money. We already have that in the monopoly known as the Federal Reserve. But now they're talking about they would have a far enhanced centralized function for all transactions, and they could easily deprive certain peoples and sectors of the economy from liquidity, and they could increase certain sectors' liquidity as well, instantly infusing digital currency into their accounts, depending on what the state wants done or what the state and the Fed want done. For example, during COVID, they could have easily injected, digital currency into certain markets to keep them from floundering. So we're seeing there's also the potential for all kinds of market distortion, even above and beyond what we have now, simply because they would be able to target it much more narrowly, and they would have a lot of control. And then if you connect the CBDC then to a UBI, a universal basic income, now we're talking about a completely state-controlled marketplace, a completely state-controlled marketplace where, your spending could be completely dictated by the Federal Reserve / federal government.
So it's like a backdoor into like the ultimate central planning state.
Oh, this is ultimate central planning. It's a backdoor into, maybe even a front door. Because, it's a backdoor because of the way they're going to sell it. And they're already starting to sell it this way in terms of so-called inclusion. Hey, anytime you hear the word inclusion, grab your gun. Really, inclusion is one of the most pernicious terms afloat today, because it means totalitarian is what it really means. Because there's no outside of a system that's all inclusive, and that's what they want. But they want to include the so-called debanked. This is a new category of beleaguered others that they're claiming to act on the behalf of. That's always the way these authoritarians operate. They use so-called beleaguered category groups or category members as a means to instigate total control over everyone. And that's what they're doing now. There's no secret to it. I talked about that, of course, in Google Archipelago, not the CBDC per se. I talk about that in the Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, but about how they use these minorities to institute greater and greater control.
Yeah, it's a pattern going back to the 70s or 60s and the welfare programs, and you can read about this in Thomas Sowell. It's the same pattern. They've hijacked it, and they're just repeating the cycle over and over.
Right. In fact, it goes back to the Bolshevik Revolution, the way that they claim to be, establishing a state for the workers and for the inclusion, economic inclusion. They didn't use that term, but it could have very well been used. The economic inclusion in the in the means of production, when really it was just a state gambit to completely control and monopolize everything.
So I want to get a little bit to your campaign. Usually in this podcast, I talk about it's called practical liberty. So I talk about freelancing, agorism, kind of topics like that. But I've been more and more interested in kind of the presidential campaign this year, because with everything that happened in COVID, I think there's a more receptive audience to our kind of, message than ever before. But I kind of, there's not going to be a libertarian sitting in the White House in 2025, or,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So
Right.
the purpose of your campaign, would you say it's more messaging, kind of spread the message? Let's like wake people up, kind of like a Ron Paul in 2008, where everybody's looking back now and going, damn, he was right about everything. Or is it there a political aim? Like we got to get 5, to 10% of the vote and set ourselves up for the next cycle and the next cycle? Or is it, some combination of the both? I'm sure, but what's your idea for the campaign right now?
Well, you're right. The campaign has an educative function, that is to try to spread the message of liberty as far and wide as possible, including the critiques of particular situations that we're in, using the principles that we have underhand. So it isn't just enough to abstractly declare, what liberty is and so forth. You have to find the flashpoints at which liberty is being crushed, and speak to those to the broad public. So it has that function. But we're also trying to build speaking of agorism and decentralization, parallel economic and social structures and political structures, this is a decentralized revolution campaign to encourage people and to actually help people run for office at the local level, to gain control of local power, to wrest it away from the central government, and to establish parallel economic, social, and political structures in their communities and across localities. And part of that campaign is, in fact, parallel currencies. And Bitcoin is, of course, a key to that. There are others. I won't get into adjudicating the question between various currencies, because I'll leave that to the specialists. But I will say that Bitcoin is definitely a major piece. The question of transparency there, or to transactions, is an issue I think needs to be addressed. And I'm told that Monero is the solution, but I'm not going to make a claim on that.
Yeah, I think if you read the Bitcoin standard, Bitcoin could be the layer, like what we settle debts in, like what backs all the other currencies through the banking system, and then you have a more private coin. There's a lot of technical ways that we can get around this. Monero is one of them.
Absolutely. Monero does not obviate the need for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin can be the superstructure under which all of this takes place. Absolutely.
If people have some concerns about these alternative currencies, because they look back at like wildcat banking and they say, there's been these things that have blown up in the past. That's why we need the government to come in and regulate this. So,
yeah,
I mean, can you talk about, because when we think about the free market, sure, that works great in businesses, but we really don't think about it in currencies. And most governments have claimed a monopoly over the currency as long as they've been in existence. So
right,
how would a free market of currencies even work? It just seems counterintuitive to most people.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, all transactions, every transaction, half of that transaction is the currency. So every transaction is mediated through currency. So currency should be thought of as another commodity in the market. And just like other commodities, it should compete with other currencies. And likewise, the way people settle on currencies is the way they're valued by people themselves, by the market, by the subjective value that people give to the currency. And that would establish their value. And then, of course, there's bidding and competition between currencies, and that's all good. We need to have private competing currencies and a real marketplace of currency, just like we want a real marketplace of other goods.
Yeah, I think people underestimate the stabilizing effect it would have if some state started accepting taxes in Bitcoin or one of these other currencies. We're at such early stages in these.
Yeah,
the market hasn't had time to settle, and it will eventually. So I don't worry too much about them in the long run. So one of the things that I think you have an advantage on over other candidates is that people don't change their mind about almost anything. All right. So there's topics like religion that people never change their mind on, their favorite sports team, and then politics seems to be one. You get past 30 and nobody ever changes their mind on politics. You did do that change, and now you're trying to make that convince other people to change their mind, because most Republicans even have a Keynesian view of the economy. So I don't know, what kind of lessons have you learned in making that shift at the point you did in your life that you can kind of take to help convince other people to make the same or similar shift?
Well, first of all, I think my case proves that it's possible, and that it can be done, and that there are many people that can be influenced either directly or after they've been more or less roughed up by the left, canceled or otherwise abused, that are going to be fence sitters not knowing where to go. And that's where we have to be on the lookout for such people, and to welcome them into the fold of liberty. And when I say fold, I mean loosely, because we know we're all individuals, but we do have a common belief in freedom and a real free market. And I think one of the things to do is to talk to them from where they're coming from. So I understand that what Marxism is deeply, but and there's not that many utterly evolved Marxists out there, but there are millions and millions and millions of unconscious Marxists who buy the premises of Marxism without knowing it, and this has to be made clear to them, and the fallacy of these premises has to be made clear.
So how do you do that? So when you're talking, because libertarians are an interesting group because we pull from both the right and the left, right? There are Democrats that we can get, and there are Republicans that we can get. So I guess what's your message to somebody on the left? Like, what are they getting wrong about the economy? Because mostly they view themselves, I lived in Philadelphia for 10, 11 years, and my friends were all lefty, progressive, Bernie Sanders type supporters. Not all of my friends, but and they consider themselves compassionate, and they look around at the poor people and the drug addicts on the street, and the healthcare system, and a lot of them, had health scares that almost bankrupt them. So they view themselves as being compassionate. How do you talk to somebody on that side to convince them that their ideas aren't going to work in the long run?
Well, first of all, I would just tell them, I would talk to them about where their premises are in terms of, you look at a Bernie Sanders statement, it's always about something about corporations or capitalists being exploitative. He doesn't use that term necessarily, but that's the underlying premise there, that every transaction that happens at the workplace between a worker and the corporation or the capitalist is an exploitative relationship. This is all hinging, of course, on the labor theory of value, and the idea of exploitation comes directly from that. And it's false. You show them that value is not based on how much labor goes into a particular commodity, or you show them that, in fact, social welfare is increased for all people overall. With the freer the market, the more overall social welfare there is. And so the redistribution of goods doesn't work. It's not. I tell them about what the economy is. The economy is not a pie, like AOC would suggest, that it's kind of a pie, and so we just need to cut it up so people have a decent share or equal or equitable share of the pie. What it is an oven for baking pies. And so if you attack the oven and dismantle the engines of wealth production, you are going to have less and less pie, and you're going to have less and less goods. So what they're doing is attacking the capital base that produces wealth, and not realizing that the economy is not a static whole, and it's not a zero-sum game. That's the other thing. They think that if somebody gains something out of a transaction, somebody must be losing. And so they think everything is a zero-sum game. So the workers getting exploited, the consumers getting ripped off, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this does happen, but it doesn't happen because of a free market. It happens because of collusion between the government and various corporations. And the monopolization of the economy by various players and sectors in the economy, which happens, ironically, not by virtue of a dysregulated or unregulated market, but particularly by regulation itself. And so I would talk to them about how regulation actually leads to monopoly, and monopoly leads to what will be exploitative labor transactions, labor will be exploited under a monopoly, and so will consumers be exploited under monopoly. So you have to get rid of monopoly, and the only way to get rid of monopoly is to cut all these companies free from the tether of the state and its support in various ways, like regulations and other types of favored status that they gain from the state. This is what creates an unfair marketplace. This is what they're really complaining about. They think it's capitalism per se, but it's really crony capitalism. It's not capitalism. Capitalism doesn't exist in our world. It's not being practiced as such. We're living under crony capitalists or corporate socialist policies, as I would put it.
Yeah, one of the arguments that I sometimes win with my lefty friends is describing the way that regulations actually keep out the little guy, the competition, because, everybody has a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit in them. So, I have friends that have little side businesses selling makeup or products they make. And I'm like, do you understand how the regulations that benefit Amazon are screwing you right now?
Yeah.
And that breaks through to people a lot of times when you can prove to them that the regulations
raise the cost of entry, make it impossible for some smaller and even mid-sized entrepreneurs to get in the game, and depending on the industry. And this makes for monopolization, and this makes for exploitative conditions, both for the consumer and the worker.
All right. So we covered how you talk to the left. How would you talk to somebody on the right who's, they're maybe a disgruntled Trump fan we have to get him back in because it was so unfair what they did to him. And he's the only one that can, handle the Middle East, and there would be no war in Ukraine. Like, how do you handle somebody on the right when you're trying to convince them that it's usually foreign policy that we disagree most with the right?
It's mostly on foreign policy and most particularly on the issue of war. There was a very brief ephemeral moment there under which the right appeared to be somewhat anti-war. That is, at least the Trump contingent of the right, thanks to his, lambasting of the Iraq War and the Ukrainian war. And there was a lot of people on the right that were saying, don't fund this war and don't fund these foreign interventions and entanglements. And then Israel came along. And now they're fully on board with Israel, and they'll probably get sandwiched in with Ukraine, and the whole ball of wax will go down the drain, just like that, into the neocon basin. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to shake it's amazing because it's so true. There was this talking point. It wasn't exactly true, but that Trump didn't start any new wars.
Right.
And he was the most anti-war candidate. He wasn't really anti-war, but it was a great talking point to have. Right. And it's just blown up. It's gone away. This anti-war sentiment.
So I would talk about how they're war socialists. If they hate socialism so much, maybe they should oppose war socialism, which is a way of extracting wealth from the private sector and distributing it to the state in order to conduct wars. And I would talk about the fact that these wars have not done anything for us as America. So they want to talk America first. These have been disastrous for the United States, not only in terms of the economic toll they have taken of trillions and trillions of dollars, but in terms of the geopolitical standing of the U.S. around the world, which has lost its power in terms of its influence over countries, particularly in the Middle East, which now disdain us thanks to the interventionist policies that we've undertaken all these years since, I guess you could go back to, funding Saddam Hussein to have a war with Iran, deposing the Shah and all that. I mean, I guess I could go back even further, but that's far enough. And that, in fact, this is an America last policy that only benefits a few players, mostly in the military-industrial complex and their political shills, and furthermore, has destabilized the United States. And this is not to speak of, but I think we should, the damage it's done to so many millions of Americans, veterans in particular. I just read an article yesterday about the brain damage that was done to veterans who weren't even in close combat, but were firing missiles from tanks at an accelerated pace, and how they're totally brain damaged from this.
Just the concussive.
And, yes.
Wow.
Concussive injuries that actually damaged the sheath myelin in their brains and caused all kind of dysfunction. People are hallucinating and having outrageous anxiety, hallucinations, delusions. Even it's just an absolute travesty what has happened to the American soldier.
And it makes me so mad because I was listening to Ben Shapiro. I like to kind of keep my, finger on the pulse of what the right's thinking. I have some lefty podcasts I listen to, but he was going through this list of all of these, we killed at least 400,000 civilians in Iraq, this many in Afghanistan, this many in Vietnam. And I didn't hear anybody complaining about that. I'm like, of course we've been complaining about that. Like, and what did we accomplish with any of this? Well, like, I think the press secretary or somebody just went to Baghdad and they had to wear a bulletproof vest 20 years after we invaded that country. What have we accomplished with any of this? We've killed millions of people. We've traumatized the Middle East. We've traumatized our own soldiers, and we've gained nothing. What are we doing?
And somebody used a really good metaphor that I'll just appropriate. I would give credit if I remembered who it was, but the empire is like a giant balloon that's completely hollow in the center. I think it was actually Daniel McAdams. I might be wrong, but I think it was him. It's like this giant balloon that gets bigger, but it's totally hollow. There's no substance to it. And it's about to break, and it'll fall. The blowback will not just be on the military engagements that the United States takes on, but also it's going to blow back real hard on the domestic population, economically and otherwise. So we have a perfect storm going on right now, where we're probably producing more militant by virtue of our unqualified support militarily and in terms of funding and so forth of Israel. We're creating numerous enemies of the United States, which could actually, result in further blowback right here again on our shores.
So you are running for POTUS, whether we get there or not. So what is your view on? Is there ever a time that the United States should support like military funding, or I guess when, if ever, should we support military funding, and when, if ever, should we put like troops on the ground or use military force?
Yeah, the only time we should use military force is if we're actually invaded, if we're actually attacked. So I believe in drawing all the troops from all 903 is the last count, although there's probably more. We've learned recently there's a secret base in Israel, for example, I think it's called something like something 152. Anyway, it sounds ominously like, Area 51 or something like that. So, draw all the troops back from all these bases, recuperate our military, find out what we need for self-protection, and jettison the rest. And of course, in terms of military employees, that would be something gradual. You don't throw people out on the street after they've served. Right. But I think the only time that military force is really justified, especially under libertarian principles, is in defense. Everything else is undefensible. It's indefensible principally, and it's practically indefensible. It's ruinous, really.
So 25 years from now, if you could have your way, would we have a standing army even after we wind things down, or we have just a reserve type, call them up if it's needed?
25 years, I'd say we'd have some standing army and some reserves. 50 years, we would have no army and no state. That's another matter.
Amen, yeah. Well, that brings us to what we can do domestically. One of your big topics is nullification, which is, right. I'm invested in several marijuana dispensaries. It's not a huge thing of mine, but it's something I get excited about sometimes. Sure. More the industry and the medical applications. But sure. Nullification is an example. Cannabis industry is an example of nullification. It's still technically federally illegal, but there's nothing the federal government can really do about it because it's so well established. So right. What are some other areas you think states should should and could have some progress in with nullification.
Well, of course, in terms of arms, bearing arms, the state or localities could have powers of nullifying federal law, which would be unconstitutional on their face. I think there's a whole slew of other issues that could be dealt with. Not only drugs, but also regulations, environmental regulations on industries. Actually CBDCs, the use of them and the coercion into that system can be totally nullified. Even the legal tender laws could possibly be nullified.
Isn't that so? Legal tender, I mean, the constitutional was the Constitution ever amended? I forget, to remove silver and gold as the only legal tender.
Yes.
Okay, so we've already gone down that. Yeah, nullification would be an interesting path there.
Yes, it would. And then, any number of industries that are being either regulated to death or being banned, or, in terms of drugs, or and then, of course, like, let's look at COVID. If even at, of course, states actually, it was states that enforced COVID mandates mostly, coming from the sort of the ethos out of the White House and so forth. But I think localities could actually nullify, and some localities did nullify state mandates there. So public health is a huge one. And given the possibility that the World Health Organization passes a treaty that the United States will be signed on to, it is going to be very incumbent upon states and localities to nullify the kinds of requirements and measures that will be passed along through the federal government.
Yeah, the COVID tyranny was one of the things that terrified me the most. I was a libertarian in college, and my first 2004, I voted for Michael Badnarik on the University of Pittsburgh. Actually, I think we both went to the same school. But so I kind of got apathetic after the Ron Paul campaign, because it just seemed like we were never going to make a difference. And, the world seemed to be going fine. And I was complaining about some of the, social justice-y stuff and some of those laws, but it didn't seem to matter that much to my life. And then COVID came and shut down everything. I sold my house in Philly, moved to the mountains. I was like, I'm done with this tyranny.
Wow.
But what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Because I'm not sure that there might be another, lab grown virus that I'm not saying it was lab grown. I'm just saying there might be.
I understand. It was. It was.
But there could be a new, pandemic or something similar to what just happened. Or it could be, there's a new Katrina that kills 5,000 people. And all of a sudden there's a climate emergency that we have to lock everybody in their houses for. How do we actually fight this? Is it just nullification, or?
No, I think it's a cultural, it's first and foremost, it's a cultural, educative movement that we have to nurture, which is already very well underway. And that is basically we're producing dissidents by the millions at this point, and these dissidents are giving force to our views, and this makes it possible for us to resist the kinds of draconian mandates and so forth that are going to be handed down if in case there's another pandemic, so-called. So I think the cultural battle has to be continued, and that isn't the culture wars per se. This is the battle for the principles of liberty for the individual have to be continually brought into play and opposed to the state's unbelievably overreaching authority.
It's there's a tendency that we have in society to be nice to people. I think especially in the West, where Scott Galloway went on and was like, well, I was in favor of shutting down my kid's school, and now I realize that was wrong, but you should all just be lenient because we were listening to the CDC. And like, I don't feel like being lenient with you. You're not apologizing for this. You ruined so many kids' lives. You caused all these like learning disabilities, and I mean, you ruined the economy for the next decade. I don't even know what the full fallout is going to be. How do we get over that tendency to like want to just forgive and forget and move on in society?
Well, we can't forget. That's one thing. As far as forgiveness goes, these people are asking for amnesty, as it were. isn't that ironic? They are asking us for amnesty after they were demanding that we be denied medical care for not having the vaccine, denied our work, denied the ability to leave your house in the case of Chomsky. People like this saying that we should be locked up. We shouldn't be allowed in polite society. We should, if we refuse, then, even forced vaccinations. That's what these people were saying. We can't forget that. Whether we forgive them is really besides the point. I think we need to know who they were and what they were doing. And I think it's necessary never to forget what these people were capable of. And, the irony here is that they move these NPCs from one issue to the next almost on a dime, right? They move them from COVID to Ukraine to now to Israel, and who knows what's next. But, we need to be keeping our eye on the ball and publicizing the importance and absolute, not just the importance, the essential character of liberty.
Yeah. Another topic I wanted to talk about, because I was talking to the lady that cleans my house, and she was telling me, I don't want to give too many details away, but there's one medication that she needs that's $28,000 every 6 weeks. The healthcare, and she's on a health insurance that pays for it, but people keep trying to get her to change health insurance, and her first question is, will you pay for this?
Yeah.
But the medical system, between the pharmaceutical system, which we've seen in COVID, is incredibly corrupt and broken. The insurance system, which we've all known for a long time, is incredibly broken. How do we practically, what are the next steps for healthcare in the United States? Like, how do we get out of this mess?
Well, I think it's direct medical service and crowdsourcing our power as consumers to have contracts with directly with medical providers, and to bypass the insurance industry by doing so. There are certain, I'm not going to name particular companies that are doing this, but they're out there, and until they pay for your advertising, I won't mention them. But
well, I use Crowd Health, and I've had the CEO on my podcast, so I'm happy to promote them.
Okay, yeah. So that's one major one right there.
Yeah.
So Crowd Health is one. So this is the wave of the future, I believe, and this is how we disintermediate the insurance companies from healthcare. And this is a huge step as far as the pharmaceutical industry goes. Well, first of all, I would say get rid of patents. Patents are the problem that are driving up the cost of healthcare and medical, and also allowed the pharmaceutical industry to have a monopoly over what treatments were possible during, for example. It's because they had patents on their particular products, on their vaccines, that they were able and that were given this limited monopoly, as it were, without which they couldn't. And then they were given a monopoly over the treatment protocols altogether. So this was all undertaken in collusion with the FDA and the CDC. All that has to be ended.
So patents are one problem. And it's also a fact of patent fraud, essentially, where they make one little tweak and extend their patent for 10 more years, 7 more years, 7 more years, right, whatever it is. But I don't know, is the FDA or the patent system a bigger problem? Because the FDA is what FDA drives up the cost into billions of dollars.
I would say the regulators here are the biggest problem. You're right. Patents are like a byproduct of the regulation, in a sense. So I would say, abolish these institutions. Interestingly enough, there are very few overlaps between my campaign and RFK's. One of them is this regulatory capture, but he approaches it from the wrong end. He thinks you can purify these regulators and somehow, get money out of the regulation business. I say the way to get rid of this problem is to get rid of the regulators altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, it isn't a corporate capture. If there was nothing to capture, they couldn't capture it.
So what you have this, I forget the exact list of agencies you'd abolish, but you have a number of three-letter agencies on your issues
Yeah.
that you would abolish, including like IRS and CDC, Department of Education, all these guys.
Yes.
Is it actually possible to abolish the IRS in the US? Like, is this a
I think
practical,
so.
like possibly, how would we, obviously I'm against governments in general, but as long as
Right.
we have some level of taxation in this country, we're going to need some mechanism for collecting it. Unfortunately.
Right. That's why you have to get rid of the income tax first,
Amen.
and then they have no job to do.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could eliminate the IRS. What was it? 800 new agents they just hired.
It was 87,000 new agents.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I think, yeah, that's horrifying. And there's not even that many billionaires. There's barely that many millionaires in the country. They're going after small businesses. That's the only, the highest audit category is waiters, right? Like it's people that work in cash get audited more than.
Yeah, that's right. And they're trying to get, what their effect is to get, to reduce the number of millionaires in this country by attacking them, by any comers into the marketplace that might get somewhere. They go after them. So it's a very socialist, anti-democrat, anti-capitalist organization. It's definitely the source of sucking our capital straight out of the system, and that's how this it's predatory. The state is illegitimate in grabbing our money like that.
It's obviously theft, and when it's explained to people, I don't understand how they can't see it. Like if somebody, I think it was Dave Smith did this analogy that or Scott Horton did, that if the Russia took over the U.S. and implemented something that looked like the income tax today, we would call it slavery. We would be outraged.
Right. Well, here's how they do it. Okay, this is a good talking point, because how do you talk to the left? One of the things is the reason why people that are left wing or moderate left or left of center, or even in the middle, even moderate right, even right wing for that matter, for example, everybody. The reason why they think this is okay is because they believe that the state is the real arbiter between the winners and the losers, that it's the only way to mediate and compensate so-called exploited people in the marketplace as they see it. And so this has always come about by virtue of the idea that some people, if they do not do as well as others, they've been robbed. They've been screwed over. Now, they have been robbed, but by the very forces we're talking about, not by their employers. So they think that the state is necessary to redistribute wealth, and therefore the income tax is necessary as a means of, the graduated income tax is a means of redistributing wealth, because they think this wealth was expropriated through theft in the first place. And the thing that they advocate is the actual theft.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
All right, we've been going pretty close to an hour. There's one more topic that I kind of want to bring up. I feel obligated to bring up. I had Joshua Smith on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. And I know there's some tension between your two campaigns.
It's all on their side, all coming from them, not from me.
Okay. Well, I know he accused you of lying about 3 specific topics. I just wanted to give you a chance to respond. So he said you said you've been talking about Bitcoin for years, but he can't find any mentions within more than 12 months ago. The other one was, he says you say you didn't support Trump in 2020, but he's found posts where you supposedly did. And then you claim to be anti-war since you were a kid, but at some point you supported some military action in Kosovo. So do you want to address those, or is there?
Yeah, I mean, let me address them. So what was the first one?
That he said you claim to have been talking about Bitcoin for years, and he can't find any mention more than.
Ago. I've been talking about it for years, and most recently, I wrote about it in my book, "The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty." Okay. So that's where I came out and advocated for it as a parallel currency. So it's not like I'm new to this. Talking about it, you could see it if you could see my old Twitter account, which has been obliterated by Twitter and not resuscitated by under the Elon Musk regime. You would find those tweets, and that I supported Bitcoin Bitcoin years ago, but
Okay.
that account is gone. And but I've written more about Bitcoin than he has.
And it's in your technically it's in your platform when it's not. He talked about it a lot. He's good on Bitcoin, but it's not technically in his platform.
It's in my platform, but it's also in my books, especially the last one.
Okay. And then the Trump support, where.
Well, yeah, I mean, I gave $25 to Trump when he was indicted because I thought it was a misuse of the state,
Okay.
that it was state persecution, and it was the regime's utter arrogance and totalitarianism. And so I gave him $25. Sue me. I mean, really, there's some misunderstanding about like political sentiments in a sense. Like, for example, Clint Russell mentioned that he's, maybe 2-3 months ago that he was still considering voting for Trump just as an FU to the regime. That's what this was. And I voted for Trump in 2016 as the same thing. It was a vote of spite against the regime. So that's what that amounts to. Okay, so and then there's some other things that some of his followers have said that are outlandish. Actually, they said I was a state agent working for the feds to create surveillance software.
Yeah, I'm not going to blame. Josh has a very trolling Twitter account personality, and he attracts a lot of people that are troll, and a lot of trolls will just say anything to get a reaction.
They'll say anything. So that one's just ludicrous. Show me one person who. I was a writer for the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon. It was an AI lab. I was merely a writer who wrote about the software. I didn't create any of it. I was just writing about it for the general public. And a couple papers that I authored were some of the funding came from DARPA. This was a job that I had, and I was working 2 other jobs simultaneously. This is how I put my food on the table for my family while I was a graduate student. I worked 3 jobs at the same time. So that's all that's about. And so I just want to clear that up. So like the idea that I developed surveillance software, first of all, I don't know how to develop any software. And the idea that I worked for the state, and interestingly, at the time, during all this, I was also running a anti-war website and speaking at anti-war rallies against the Iraqi war. So I've been an activist against war for a long time. The Clinton thing, what was that about?
Just supporting Kosovo action.
Yeah, see, I just didn't know any better. At that time, I was fairly partisan, left, hardcore left Democrat, politically, like not theoretically, but politically. So I was trying to draw a distinction between the Iraqi war and the Kosovo intervention. And, I didn't know enough about the Kosovo intervention to really exonerate that in any way. And I don't anymore at all.
So just a mistake,
mistake. I made a mistake. That's 20 plus, I think 25 years ago, something like that.
I mean, that happens. We've all evolved politically.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't born with an L on my foot, Anyway.
All right. I mean, I think that clears it up. There's a lot of there's a lot of trolling online between the 2 campaigns. I think eventually you guys are going to work something out.
I mean, I'm open to working something out. I don't have trolls. I don't think so, but maybe I do. I don't know, because I'm trying to stay out of the muck and keep my eye on the big picture of what the campaign's about, but also what the regime is doing and how we stop it. So I try not to get in the mud, although sometimes I slip. And
I think honestly, trolling and memes and stuff is going to be, I think, an important part of campaigning. And I know there's libertarians out there that will be, whichever one of you, because it seems to be down to you two. You have a little more endorsements and firepower behind you, but one of you is going to be on, it seems, the nominee, and then hopefully you'll work together. And
listen, I've met Josh several times now, and I like him. I think we could be friends. If it weren't for this campaign, I'm sure we'd be bosom buddies. So I welcome any kind of rapprochement between us. And I don't want this to be about like some fire spitting campaign between us. That's not what I'm aiming at. I didn't come into this with that in mind. I had no idea this would happen when I was asked to do this. I just didn't have any clue about what the some of the aspects of the environment, and I'm not strictly blaming him for it. And I understand where he's coming from too, in terms of the Mises Caucus endorsement, and in terms of Dave Smith's endorsement. He feels he was cheated or something, and I understand that sentiment, and I'm not going to hold it against him.
Yeah, I don't think he feels cheated. I think he feels like they're calling the race too early, that he's still in it and there's still a fight to be had, and they're pretending it's over.
I would never say the race is over. There's still a fight to be had, and I look forward to meeting him on the trail very soon. In fact, we'll be seeing each other this weekend in South Carolina. Both of us will probably not be too welcomed.
Excellent. So what can my audience do to kind of help you out if they want to get involved in the campaign, follow you, donate? Where can I send people? How can we help?
Please send them over to rectheregime.com. That's rectheregime.com. Please get involved. If you can't donate time. If you can't donate time, lend us emotional support. Give us sign up as a delegate if possible. Or at least, join the LP if you're not already a member. So we have all of those avenues open on our website. We're promoting the LP. We've gotten a lot of donations that have not gone to us, but to the LP, and we welcome that. So we're trying to support the party at the same time.
All right. Well, I've really enjoyed this. Really enjoyed this conversation. We'll send people to rectheregime.com. Any closing thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, just let's do it. Let's actually first of all, let's get some force up together. And one of the things we need to do is we need to build a new anti-war movement like right now.
Amen.
Yeah. Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, wreck the regime. And until next time, stay free.